Last time there's actually people here.
Yeah, we got a church full now.
Hey, tonight I'm going to talk on some evidence of the resurrection.
Amen.
I like to listen to a lot of podcasts and debates between really intelligent people. I mean, it blows my mind how smart people can be. But there's a lot of stuff on YouTube, and you can hear on the radio. They'll have these debates or conversations, depends on who they are, about different subjects. And they seem to know something about everything. I mean, they're like college professors or physicists or, very educated people, and they have this wealth of knowledge. And it just blows my mind listening to them because they can take anything, any subject, any point in history, and have in-depth, without notes, just have these in-depth discussions about it. And they can go back and forth and argue back and forth or agree with each other on different things, but it's just amazing. And I try to follow along. My brain can barely process what's going on. Most of it goes over my head, but I like to pick out different bits and pieces here. And a lot of these conversations always end up on the religious side. I mean, they talk about all kinds of things, world problems and this and that. And they always seem to come down to religion. And one debate in particular was between an atheist, like a true atheist doesn't believe anything in the spiritual world. There's nothing different between men and animals, like if a squirrel gets hit by a car, it's dead, lights out, that's it. Same thing with humans, they get killed, dead, lights out, nothing else. And the other guy was, I think he's a Christian today. This is probably from 4 or 5 years ago. But he's very knowledgeable about the Bible. And they agreed on a lot of things. A lot of the teachings in the Bible, they agreed that they're just very good lessons that can be applied today, and the truth then, and the truth that it talks about is truth now, and how society works that way and builds off of that. And it was kind of surprising because one was an atheist, but he was kind of agreeing with the Christian, or the sort of Christian guy. And they came down to talking about Jesus, and they both agreed that Jesus was a man that existed and had the following, was very intelligent, well versed in the Word, the Old Testament. And they both agreed on that. And then, like always, it comes down to the resurrection. And they both agree that though it was possible, that it was unlikely because they didn't have any evidence of it. And I'm like, well, that kind of got me going because I'm sitting there listening to that and I'm like, ooh, I'm not there, but pick me, kind of like Arnold from Welcome Back, Carter, if you guys remember that show from the 70s. Long time ago, I realized the evidence of the resurrection, and through all their knowledge and smarts, they didn't even touch on it. They just kind of blew it off. And so I just wanted to kind of bring that up tonight because if you ever have conversations with people, and a lot of people are like that, they'll know the Word, or be familiar with it, or they've gone to church.
Yes, you will. Yeah.
But it's just a book to them. It's just information. Some of it's good, some of it they don't talk about any evidence of it.
Amen.
And the evidence of the resurrection kind of depends on what you mean of evidence, because they didn't have cell phones back then. They couldn't take pictures of Jesus walking around, miracles, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's nothing we can see today. So I thought, well, what kind of evidence really got me convinced? So I thought about, well, if you go walk outside and the ground's wet, and the street's all wet, and there's puddles everywhere, and there's water dripping from the trees and from the roof, it's evidence that it rained.
Right, amen.
That's kind of evidence I was thinking of. And that's not the only possibility. I mean, the fire department could have came by and hosed everything down. I mean, that's not out of the question. It's not impossible. But the most likely thing, the conclusion that they would have come to is that it rained.
Amen.
So that's the kind of evidence I'm like, well, what kind of evidence can we go with the resurrection? The first thing I think of is the disciples. The disciples were just regular guys. Jesus walked by, kind of picked them up here and there, and they followed them around for about 3 years, a little over 3 years. And they witnessed all these miracles. They witnessed all the things that Jesus did and said and taught. And all the religious leaders came down on him, but he was always ready to come right back with the Word.
Yes,
he didn't do nothing about it. So to them, he was building himself up in their eyes. And they were getting more and more convinced. And Jesus finally asked Peter, "Who do you say that I am?" And he said, "You are the Christ," which means you are the Messiah. And to Peter and the disciples, the Messiah, I don't know if you kind of think of it different today, but then they thought of the Messiah from the Old Testament, because they're all from the Old Testament, and from the book of Isaiah, they thought a couple different possibilities. Is the Messiah was like a military leader that would come down and appointed by God to take over and bring the Jews from bondage out of, they were really in bondage with Rome at the time. They were kind of second-class citizens of Rome. They really didn't have the rights that the Romans did. So they thought the Messiah would come down, build up this kingdom, drive all the Romans out, all the enemies out, and it'd be like in a time of David where everything was good and the Messiah would judge all the good things people did, and he punished all the bad things that people did. So to their eyes, he would be this great king, a great prophet, a priest that God elected himself to judge basically the earth here on earth. So that's what they had in their mind of what Jesus was going to do in the near future. It was coming up. And it sounds pretty great because they were his followers. And they were so close to him, they probably assumed that they would be all part of it. They'd have their own positions in this new world and everything. They probably just thought it was the most amazing thing. And they're all excited about it. And that's what they're looking forward to. And then one day Jesus was arrested. And they watched him be beaten and tortured and killed. And you must imagine what they thought after Jesus died on the cross. I mean, this is the Messiah, the guy, the one God really brought to them to be the new king on earth. And he was dead. And right after that, they were all gathered together in the upper room, wondering what's going on, what's going to happen to them. I mean, they were in danger from the Jews. They saw what happened to Jesus, and they must have felt let down. Must have felt abandoned by him, and because they had all this stuff in their mind that was going to happen, and none of it was going to happen. So they're all in the upper room, and they're what's going on. And I was trying to imagine how they felt. And I thought, well, there's a lot of places on earth today in the world that it's very dangerous to be a Christian. Mm-hmm. You can be killed literally for being a Christian.
China,
Yep. And I thought, well, what if we were in a place like that right now? And what if there was a mob outside right now waiting for us to walk out the door to kill us just for being here? And what would we do? I wouldn't be in a big hurry to go out there. I'd be sitting here trying to think of something and what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We could push Kobe out the door and lock it behind him. He's being we could run out the back or something. That's the only thing we could do. But that's a situation they were in. It was a life and death situation. They were scared for their lives. And if you can fast forward just a couple of months, what did they do? Did they escape? Did they sneak out in the middle of the night in disguise and wander for days and days and days to get far enough away where they're going to be recognized? Did they go to the high priest and get on their knees and beg for forgiveness and deny Jesus and say he was false and they were fooled by him just to save themselves? Mm-hmm. That's what you think they might have done, but they didn't do that. What did they do? They're out amongst the people preaching that Jesus was the Messiah.
Amen.
Jesus was the only way to God. That Jesus was the Son of God himself. And so you had to wonder, well, what would make these men do that? Why would they be afraid for their lives one minute and completely be willing to sacrifice their lives the next? And to me, that's evidence. That is evidence of the resurrection.
Evidence of the resurrection. Amen.
And there's also the Apostle Paul. Anybody remember that? The Apostle Paul from the Bible, he's towards the back somewhere. He used to be Saul, back in the day. Very fierce was Saul. Saul was a Pharisee. Now there was amongst the leadership of the Jews in that time, there was the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Sadducees, they kind of think of them as politicians. They were more of into their positions for themselves, for their own personal gain, for their own position, their own wealth. They were under the rule of the Romans, but they were willing to kind of like play the game, to work with the Romans, to be able to keep in power. So they didn't care about. They didn't want the Messiah to come back. They didn't want the resurrection to happen. They knew those things were coming, but they didn't want it because that was threatening their positions they were. And they liked to walk around and have people bow down to them and be able to get the money. And then there's the Pharisees. They were a little bit different. They were I think the word Pharisee actually means come out. They came out from that kind of crowd of people, and they were really Old Testament following, all the stuff of the laws. They took that very seriously. They didn't want to associate with the Sadducees because they knew they were fake. But they thought they were the real deal. All the little laws that they had to go through, they were the authority on those, and they were the example for the other people to follow. And that's how they lived their whole lives. And they were completely dedicated to that. And Paul, he was one of the most extreme Pharisees. He was, the Orthodox observer of the Old Testament. He dedicated his life to following the laws of God because he really believed he was doing the work of God. That was God demanded of him, and he was serious about doing that.
Yes.
And he saw all the Christians as perverting this way of life. So he really hated this new, they call it the way, the new way of thinking, the new way of life, the new covenant of God. So he just saw that as an insult. And when Stephen was stoned, he was there, and he didn't promote it, but he agreed with it. He went along with it, and he supported it. He thought it was the right thing to do. And since then, he really saw that as the only way of getting rid of this whole Christianity thing. Christianity thing was going out and arresting them and bringing them back to trial and voting to have them killed. He thought that was the only way to wipe this whole Christian mess up. So he was on his way one day to do the same thing. He had these letters of approval from the Sadducees, kind of like a search warrant, almost like you get today, giving him permission to do this and support from the other Pharisees and Sadducees to go out and arrest these people. So he's full bore, just ready to go, get him as usual. Actually, he was more, if I think of Paul, or Saul at the time, he was more like a terrorist. He not only arrested the men, he arrested the men and the women and destroyed their homes in the area to send a message to everybody else, to put the fear of God in them. He thought he was doing the right thing.
Yes.
And he was on his way to do that. And just like that, all of a sudden, without any warning, he completely stopped doing it. He completely turned his back on this whole way of life that he was completely dedicated to. And you think, well, why would he do something like that? And I just think that more evidence of the resurrection. Because Jesus told him to stop. And that's the only thing that could have stopped him. And his entire life was dedicated to this way of thinking. But he just completely stopped it. And there's no other explanation besides the Lord. Jesus told him to stop. In Philippians 3, Todd mentioned this, kind of got me scared again. In Philippians 3:8, talked about all his works and titles and religious achievements, position, status, all the things he thought were gains in life, the things worth fighting for, the things that God wanted him to do, the things that he would give credit to, he counted as dung. And the dung it was a waste of his life. He was wasting all that time. And all the stuff he thought he was doing for God was actually pushing him away from God. Until that day where he completely stopped doing it because the Lord told him to. And instead of those things, those worldly things being gained, he thought the salvation through Jesus was the only gain there was. That was the only thing that would bring you close to God.
Yes, yes.
Now there's a counter argument to all this. Kind of like the fire truck hosing everything down. It doesn't make much sense. But some people believe it, and I've heard it before too, that when the disciples were in the upper room, they felt more, after Jesus was killed, they were so ashamed of what they'd done and followed the wrong person that they made up the entire New Testament. I mean, that's kind of the only counter argument I've ever heard to this. Now, I've done some stupid things in my day. But I can't think of anything where I'd risk being imprisoned over, or stoned to death over, or beaten over. So I just really don't see any water to that at all. I mean, but that's the best I got. That's the only thing I've ever come up with the counter argument. Of all those other things I consider evidence of the resurrection, is if you put yourself in the place of these people, in the life and times they lived, and the things they went through, and what they believed was going to happen according to the Old Testament, and saw how they completely changed their lives, did a complete 180 of what would you expect them to do. I just only see that as evidence evidence of the resurrection.
Amen.
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 Give the Lord a hand of praise.